Hey there, welcome to CandTCollectibles. I am C. Hope you are doing well. All right, we continue on with my endeavor to put together my shopping list and find players in the Major League Baseball that are on the path to longer-term relevance. So this is the Hall of Fame tracker. This is my homework, and I'm pleased to share it with you. Today, we're going to take a look at the catching position. Maybe not the most exciting position to most. They have a profile similar to pitchers where wins above replacement certainly is a large component, and that's our primary component during this exercise. However, hardware does play an increasing, maybe outsized role, so the defensive side of things can get guys over the hump if the overall wins above replacement is not there. Let's get into it. 19 catchers are in the Hall of Fame. This is the fewest for any position, second fewest for any position. So there's some room to add a few players potentially. The average wins above replacement is 52. So we'll be using a little lower metric to track these guys than we would if they were an infielder or an outfielder. So when you're doing this kind of thing, and you're doing comparisons, tracking, be mindful of the position, all right? Catchers have a little bit lower bar overall than, say, an outfielder or a first baseman. So highest wins above replacement belongs to Johnny Bench, 74.8, class of 89, most hits. Ivan Pudge Rodriguez, class of 2017, with 2,844 hits, and the most home runs belongs to Mike Piazza, class of 16, with 427 round trippers. All right, before we get into the meat of this, let's not forget about a couple of players baseball has, and it's a shame. So Bill Freehan, 44.8 wins above replacement, but he was an 11-time All-Star with 5 Gold Gloves to find the position for a generation. For the most part, he did not make it in the Baseball Writers Association, but when you compare him to other players that the Veterans Committee have gotten in, he compares extremely favorably. Again, look at all that hardware, and the 44.8 wins above replacement is nothing to sneeze at overall. Unfortunately, Mr. Freehan passed away about a little over a year ago, so he will not be around to see his induction, which we hope will come sooner rather than later. Thurman Munson, 40 wins above replacement, MVP, Rookie of the Year, 7 All-Star games, 3 Gold Gloves, passed away prematurely in a plane accident. There was an opportunity to call a special session around 1980 and get him in. It probably should have happened, but it did not. And so when you look at those numbers overall, Rookie of the Year, All-Star games, again, one of the better, if not the best catcher at his of his generation. So that, well, Johnny Bench was right there, so maybe he's overshadowed a little bit in that era. But however, he can stand on his own just fine. Of catchers that have won the MVP, there's a couple of them that are not yet eligible, and only Elston Howard has won MVP and not gotten into the Hall of Fame. So hopefully these two get some further consideration. I had him on this list last year, have him here again this year. Unfortunately, probably have him on again next year, but hopefully one of these days this gets fixed, and I no longer have to have him on here. So, all right, a couple players are coming up on eligibility, not current anymore, but soon will be relevant again, I believe. So, Joe Mauer with an MVP, couple top 5 MVPs, 6 All-Star games, 3 Gold Gloves, 5 Silver Sluggers, 3 batting titles. He was the first catcher to get a batting title since World War II, roughly. So he was more of an offensive-minded catcher, kind of continuing the tradition of Pudge and Piazza. He was no slouch behind the plate either, even though the numbers don't really play that out. But as far as catchers for this generation, he ranks very favorably with players that are already in the Hall. And Buster Posey, who many people think is a lock, if he's in, I'm sorry, Mauer's in as well. So MVP, Rookie of the Year, 7 All-Star games, Gold Glove, and a batting title of his own. So they're their first catchers to get the MVP since Pudge, and Pudge was the first one since Thurman Munson. So it happens every once in a while, and they all get in. So if we look at the Jaws ranking, this is Jay Jaffe's WAR system, where he looks at the peak 7 years of a player and averages that out, and you can see that peak 7 years. Johnny Bench leads the way, so you get a good feel of who were the best catchers at their peak. And so then you have some longevity that comes into play as well. But clear Hall of Famers. Joe Mauer fits in very nicely with the rest of these guys, kind of at the lower end of that elite tier, but still within it, well within it. Thurman Munson fits in there as well. Buster Posey's in there. Bill Freehan is in there. Jason Kendall, who's an interesting case here. I think his wins above replacement was a little low, but he sure put up some offensive numbers to fit the bill. But we'll talk about a few different players that sneak in there as well. And Yadier Molina is in there and will continue to climb perhaps just a little bit before he calls it quits at the end of the year. All right, a couple of players that really have gotten a bump in the last few years here. So Fangraphs and Baseball Reference calculate wins above replacement differently. Fangraphs puts a little bit more emphasis on defense. In 2019, they changed their metrics up to include pitch framing, which they figured was increasingly important and a valuable skill. That gave huge bumps to Russell Martin and Brian McCann, put them both over the line here with roughly 55 wins apiece here. 4 All-Star games for Russell Martin, a Gold Glove and a Silver Slugger. Brian McCann, 7 All-Star games, 6 Silver Sluggers, and 288 defensive wins above replacement. So these two players have a case to be made, especially when that defense comes in. So if we're looking at it from a sabermetric point of view, and increasingly Hall of Fame voters are doing that as they recognize WAR is kind of one of the primary things as well. If pitch framing starts to come into play for catchers, then these guys have a huge bump, and there's a case to be made. Now, when you compare them to even Mauer and Posey, who likely get in at some point, McCann's pretty favorable. Russell Martin, no, but someday maybe the Veterans Committee takes a look at these guys a little bit more seriously. But if we strip away the awards and just look at them on the surface here, Player A, 1,500 hits, a little blind review here. Player A, 1,500 hits with a 129 weighted runs created. 216 defensive WAR. And you can see the numbers right here. I don't need to read them off for you, but they're fairly similar in most regards. You have one player that stands out on the offensive side of things, and then you've got some players that stand out on the defensive side of things. But I think if you put them all together and you say someone like Player A, Buster Posey, is a definite lock at some point, how can you say that the other guys shouldn't even be considered? I think it's a lot closer than that. So Player B, Russell Martin. Player C, Joe Mauer, and we'll wrap it up with Brian McCann. So I think extra consideration or some consideration is merited in the case of these two guys here. So we'll see if the Hall agrees. I don't have a vote. So all right, let's talk about some of the current players here. And basically, catchers, they don't have to put up 5, 6, 7 win seasons. Okay, if they're at their peak, usually it's a 5-win season. Right around age 28, 29, something like that on average. Otherwise, they're putting up 3.5, 4 wins on an annual basis. So we want to see players that are able to put up roughly 4 wins, give or take just a little bit. If you're able to do that over a period of time, then you can stay on the track. And so Alejandro Kirk and Keibert Ruiz have a favorable glide path. They are 23 years old, so they're on here mostly due to their age. What they're going to have to start doing is putting up those 4 or 5 win seasons to stay on the track. So they're not off by a ton right now. They are required to have less than 4 wins above replacement for the next, really the next dozen years. And so they'll have to be consistent and they'll have to be good, and that should start pretty soon. But because they came up at an early age, they are in a favorable spot. And so that's why people love those guys that come up young. So their path is a little bit easier. So Dalton Varsho, Cal Raleigh, a couple other guys that's like, okay, you're right in there. You have to start producing at a fairly high level. Dalton Varsho, maybe he's more of an outfielder, and that would change his overall requirements. So you wouldn't need to have 48 wins by age 35. You'd probably have to be somewhere like 55 wins or something like that, or closer to 60 if he became that outfielder. So we don't know about him too much here. Adley Rutschman is the one that intrigues me the most as well, as well as everybody else, probably for the most part here. 24 years old, and in his first season put up 5.3 wins above replacement. That's a peak level year for most catchers on average, and he did that in his first year. If he's able to continue to improve, then he can bring down that number that's needed to achieve that 48 wins by age 35 when catchers start to taper off just a little bit here. And again, just coming up at a little bit later than normal, but producing, we can certainly expect good things from Adley Rutschman. A couple of the other guys here kind of far off the path, and they're going to need some serious hardware to remain in contention. All right, spotlight a few individual players here. Sean Murphy, age 27, 10 wins above replacement. Hall of Fame average is around 22, so he's off the pace. You can see that he's tracking pretty well, but he just came up late, and so half the battle is coming up early. So that wasn't his case, unfortunately, but he's got other routes here. So if he can continue to put up 4.5, 5 wins for the next 8 or so years, then he can continue to close the gap on this line here. Defensive win, 40 wins above replacement here, and he has a Gold Glove to his name. So can he define the position defensively? Can he add some hardware, get some Silver Sluggers, get some Gold Gloves, start to pad the award side of things? If he's able to do that, that makes it a little bit more interesting. But right now, he's going to have to continue to be an above average player, which he was. He was a top 3 catcher for most of the year, if not the whole year, in 2022. So we'll see if he can continue to close that gap, and it's worth monitoring. Will Smith, Another favorite of people. To age 27, 11 wins above replacement. Hall of Fame average is closer to 23. So off the path again because he came up a little bit later than his ideal. 4.5 wins are needed on an annual basis to get to that 48 by age 35. Defensive wins above replacement. He's got a handful of them. So again, can he define the position offensively? He's probably one of the better offensive players at the position. So can he stand out and start adding some hardware to his collection? Yasmani Grandal has been a player that's been tracking very, very well for a period of time. Age 33, his 37 wins above replacement. Hall of Fame average is around 45. A negative year this year hurt him, so he's been closing the gap and following along the line pretty well. 2020 even was a positive player where most players kind of flatlined and took him off the path a little bit. But this year he regressed and stagnated. So for the next couple of years, really, can we get another 5 years out of him? Let's see, and we'll need 4 wins above replacement on an annual basis, roughly, to really make his case here. And we'd like to see some hardware for the most part. So again, a player that was tracking very, very well fell off the pace this year. So we'll lighten the load on Yasmani until he can get back on track here. The stagnation would not be a good sign, especially with the lack of Gold Gloves and such here. So all right, Sal Perez, age 32, interesting case here. 15 wins above replacement. Hall of Fame average is about 43. So he had a monster offensive season last year. But before that, he was really a kind of a 1.5, 2, 3 win player or something like that in best case. So to get to that 48 by 35, forget it. Defensive WAR, he's a negative defensive player. But when you look at the awards, and this is why it's such a key for positions that like pitcher and catcher that don't have a ton of the flash. You're looking at 7 All-Star games, 5 Gold Gloves, 4 Silver Sluggers. And so I don't know how he got 5 Gold Gloves, but he has 4 Silver Sluggers last year. Again, monster year, and in the 7 All-Star games. So he'll merit some consideration as a fan favorite, and he may be able to sneak one by some voters that look at the counting stats, the All-Star games and the Gold Gloves, and might sneak in a vote or two. But if the sabermetric community starts to dominate the voting, they'll look at the wins above average, the WRC plus, things of that nature, and it's going to be a tough hill to climb for Sal Perez. So honestly, being liked is an intangible that shouldn't be overlooked. So JT Realmuto, age 31, he has about 30 wins above replacement to his name. Hall of Fame average is closer to 40, so he is tracking fairly. And he'll need about 4.5 wins over the next call it 4 or 5 years to continue to close this gap. So here's another late starter, but has been tracking extremely well, defensive well, about 80. Now, what's hurt him is Yadi. So Yadi has been the dominant force at catcher in the National League, and so JT hasn't gotten as much hardware behind the plate as one would hope. And so perhaps with Yadi out of the way, he can win a few here, or voters recognize that, gosh, this guy was number 2 to the generation's best. So we'll see how that plays out. 3 All-Star games, Gold Glove, couple of Silver Slugger. So he's been just fine. But I think when you compare him to a couple of guys that we've talked about earlier, like Brian McCann, the hardware differential, you'd almost have to say, look at the guys that have put up a lot of those counting stats. Maybe they've got a spot ahead of JT Realmuto. So he's an interesting target, but I think there's players I would put ahead just by a little bit. All right, wrap it up here with Yadier Molina. This one was fairly obvious. He is a Hall of Famer. He's got the commensurate WAR. And when you look at his awards, this is where it's a big deal. A couple of top 5 MVPs, 10 All-Star games, 9 Gold Gloves, 4 Platinum Gloves, and a Silver Slugger. Defensive WAR approaching 400. He defined the position generationally. His offense has been just fine. He's been more of a compiler because he's been around for so long, but that's part of the deal. It certainly counts. But when you combine it with being the premier player at your position for a decade plus, then that is a route to get in as well. So again, there's multiple ways for guys to get into this to get into the Hall. And you just need to dominate one way or another. So that would make you a Hall of Famer. So, all right, that's what I got for you. If you like this content, like, subscribe, do all that kind of good stuff. And we will get back to you next week with some First Baseman. Have a good one.